Black Flag could be considered one of the most important bands of the 20th century. They are considered one of the creators of hardcore punk rock music. They were pioneers in independent touring, and they founded SST Records, which would launch careers of groundbreaking bands impacting popular and independent music for years to come. My name is Aaron, and in 2006, I thought I was going to make a Black Flag documentary film. A band that couldn't be stopped, and a documentary film that couldn't be made. This is by any means a brief history of Black Flag. Black Flag was the brainchild of Greg Ginn, the lead guitarist and the band's sole consistent member. He grew up with his family in Hermosa Beach, a quiet community within Los Angeles that was very culturally distant from Hollywood. Greg grew up not listening to much music at all. He had an interest in business and ham radio. In 1966, just 12 years old, Greg started a small business selling electronic parts called Solid State Tuners, or SST for short. Greg would not end up developing an interest in music until several years later when he donated money to local radio station KPFA. In return, they sent him a copy of David Ackles' American Gothic.
Mrs. Molly Jenkins.
My younger brother had a guitar sitting around the house, and I was about 19 years old. It was an acoustic guitar, and I just started banging on it. I was going to college at the time, and I kind of would go home from school and just bang on the acoustic guitar. He had a chord book laying around. I started learning that just for fun.
He also sent away for a copy of Little Johnny Jewel by television after reading about punk rock in the Village Voice.
Now, little Johnny Jewel, he's so...
My fascination with Black Flag began before high school. My dreams of becoming a filmmaker or a musician seemed unattainable. So I was entranced when my brother showed me some punk rock videos that he had taped late one night from MTV. Punk rock had a rawness and approachability that seemed to be missing from the classic rock that I was mostly listening to at the time. Punk rock was somehow able to be angry and fun. It was something that I not only wanted to do, but felt capable of doing. Greg eventually started a band called Panic with his brother Raymond on bass, and the drummer was going to be a record store employee that Greg had befriended named Keith Morris.
One day we were in the SST workspace, and Iggy and the Stooges came on the radio, Search and Destroy, and I do remember jumping up on a desk and kicking everything off the desk. There was a big sofa in the middle of the room, and I went running for the sofa, and I jumped up on one of the arms of the sofa and leapt all the way across the sofa and once again landed on my face. Greg looks up at me and says, you're not going to play drums in Black Flag. You're the vocalist. Jeff Migdal, he was my best friend in high school. His younger brother, Brian, ended up being the first drummer in Black Flag.
Panic had several bass players that switched out based on their availability, including a young recording engineer named Glenn Lockett, also known as Spot. They wouldn't have a permanent bass player until Greg had made friends with the bass player of Worm, Gary McDaniel, who would later adopt the stage name of Chuck Dukowski. Panic's first gig was at a house party. They played for a small crowd that started throwing beer cans at them while a fight broke out. In January 1978, Spot convinced Greg to come into the studio where he worked called Media Art and record late at night when the rates would be cheapest. The studio was located above a bar that had a cover band playing that night. The band had to play as loud as they could in order to drown out the sound of the band playing below them. Greg used no distortion pedal on his guitar. The distortion heard on the Nervous Breakdown EP is from sheer volume. Around this time, the practice space used by Panic and Worm was raided by the police, and the bands were all forced to move their practice elsewhere. They ended up relocating to a communal living space called The Church, where Greg did all of his SST work.
Okay, the church, it used to be a Baptist church, and now they just rent out all the rooms in it and stuff. And there's some other bands in here. We practice here, and Ron lives here, and Robo lives here.
At the church, they learned of several other bands locally named Panic, so Raymond Pettibone, Greg's brother, suggested the change to Black Flag, and he created the iconic logo.
Black Flag's logo originated by one Raymond Pettibone, the amazing artist. That became synonymous with unrest, chaos, rebellion, and those pushing against anything you got.
If you have a band, you have to have a name, you know? It was just a suggestion, and, you know, and they went with it.
For me, when Ray dropped the name, I was like, yes. And the bars, I go, yes.
The only label that showed any interest in putting out the first set of Black Flag recordings was Bomp Records, who ran into financial troubles that year and were unable to commit to putting out the record. So Greg decided to put it out himself.
SST started to put out the first Black Flag record because we didn't have any other way to put it out. I had a company called SST Electronics. I built electronics equipment. And so when we recorded our first record, and we waited around for a while, and then I finally decided, well, I could figure out how to do this and put out the first EP, Nervous Breakdown.
As someone who dreamt of producing art for a living, the idea of being able to make it happen through sheer force of will, as Greg Ginn would demonstrate time and time again, was absolutely inspiring to me. In my search to find out more information, to my disappointment, I would find that there was very little written about the band. The biographical book by Stevie Chick had not been written yet, the extensive article by Jay Babcock had not been published yet, and even the quintessential book Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad had not yet been published. All I was able to find were some interviews with the band, a few articles that had been written, and Henry Rollins' spoken word material along with his book Get in the Van. It was because of this that I cemented the idea in my head that nobody was ever going to tell Black Flag's story, so I should. Still unable to get Black Flag booked at a traditional venue, Greg rented out a Moose Lodge in Redondo Beach for their first non-house party gig. He also booked Rhino 39 and the Alley Cats, hoping that those bands would attract a crowd.
Oh, it was incredible. I was just jaw-dropping. I mean, the first time I saw Greg and Chuck play live and Keith, it was just like, everything I'd seen up to them was like the Partridge Family. Everything I'd seen up to that point was just like, okay, that was one thing, now this is something completely different.
Their set culminated with Keith tearing down an American flag and wrapping it around himself. This prompted the members of the Moose Lodge in attendance to immediately throw him out. Black Flag established early on that it was willing to play anywhere and for anyone. This was maybe no more obvious than the notorious gig at Pollywog Park. The park frequently hosted music for families, usually jazz or classical. Greg told the event organizers that the band played Rumors-era Fleetwood Mac covers. Eventually, someone comes out to address the crowd and has to advise them against throwing things at the band.
Okay, well, we're to hear more of Black Flag. If everybody stops throwing things around inside this theater. Now, who wants to hear more of Black Flag?
Some other early shows would see some greater success, including opening for The Last, playing with the Descendants, and playing with the Reactionaries, an early iteration of the Minutemen. However, some of those early gigs also started to gain some notoriety for incidents of violence.
A band from Hermosa Beach, California called Black Flag has earned a reputation as a group with a particularly violent following.
Black Flag began gaining some notoriety in the community for the amount of flyers that they passed out and pasted on lampposts and telephone poles. However, the combination of vandalism, along with the dark nature of Pettibone's artwork, caught the attention of the police early on. Band members were often being followed to or from band practice by the police. While the Moose Lodge gig and the release of the Nervous Breakdown EP would provide the band with new fans and new venues to play at, the band was still practicing daily and playing relatively few gigs.
I found myself constantly being the excuse for the lack of progress in the band. They had started to become very like workmanlike, and they had a pattern of wanting to rehearse every night for a minimum 3 hours, and that would be Monday through Sunday. And there's other things to do besides just being this band, and we're not really playing that many shows. So I just got to the point where I was tired of being in a room and it would be 3 against 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why am I arguing with you guys? It's not even worth arguing with you guys because you're right, I'm wrong. And so I just eventually left.
In less than 3 weeks, friend of the band and fellow church resident Ron Reyes would join Black Flag as their second lead singer. He would be their lead singer for less than 6 months, but his time in the band was immortalized by the documentary The Decline of Western Civilization. In April of 1980, the band entered the studio again and recorded what would become the Jealous Again EP. Ron, however, had a habit of walking out of the studio mid-take, according to Spot. This habit would appear again as Ron walked off stage in the middle of a set on May 23rd, 1980.
I had no intentions to quit the band, really. It's just it was one of those moments where I was on stage and I looked around, and this scene that was developing was just like, it was just a little bit of a zoo out there, and I really felt like it wouldn't have mattered if I was preaching a sermon or, you know, talking about the green grass or whatever. It wouldn't have mattered. People were just gonna just do the thing anyway. And I think I had some friends there, and certainly my girlfriend from Vancouver was there, and you know, people were getting hurt, and I just like, you know, that's not what I was into.
He would soon move to Vancouver with his girlfriend and become very active in the music scene there. After auditioning several other people for the lead singer position, Chuck offered it to Ron Reyes' friend Des Cadena. This addition to the band was especially intriguing for Greg, as it would mean having another guitar player in the lineup. Black Flag began a small tour up the West Coast that would end up putting them in Vancouver. Ron Reyes was aware that the band would be in town.
And for some reason, I was not allowed to go into the show. Or maybe I just wasn't allowed to go in for free. I don't know. But I was really upset with that. And, of course, I had a lot of liquid courage going those days. And so later on, I got in a bit of a brawl with my friend Des. And it was one of those things, it's hard to explain why it happened, other than I was pissed off because not getting into the show. But, I mean, I love Des, I love the band. It was just a kind of a momentary lapse of reason or something.
Is this a myth that he hit you in the head with a brick?
No, that's true.
That's true?
And the brick, my head was fine, but the brick cracked in half. And he says he doesn't remember this, but it was a stupid thing. That's old news.
Would he do it because he was jealous because you were the new lead singer?
He was really drunk.
He would also later put a brick through the windshield of their van, as well as alert the Canadian authorities of their presence, who then forced the band out of the country for not having proper work permits. Back in Los Angeles, Black Flag would have a litany of confrontations with the police throughout the fall of 1980. Shows on September 19th, October 4th, and October 8th all ended in police violence. The police intervention became so predictable that Chuck invited the local media to cover the inevitable violence of the show at Bass Hall. Since near-lethal eruptions had marred 3 of Black Flag's concerts earlier this year, we took our cameras for a first-hand look on October 24th, when the band headlined the bill at an East Hollywood hall. But Black Flag barely got a chance to play that night. Only 1 hour after the concert began, the police was summoned.
The owner decided that he wanted to close the establishment, and he requested us to stand by. We did so, and they refused to leave. He requested that we go inside and clean up. He had received a lot of damage from the inside as to property. Therefore, we went inside and had the individuals that were inside exit the location.
What was just happening there? Was that blood on the floor? And what was this Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil? I mean, that to me brings up the Nazi movement. Is the punk movement part of the Nazi movement?
No, that's the police. That's the Nazi movement.
The police is the Nazi movement?
Yeah. It's a preemptive effort to stop the shows. It started 2 years ago.
Why are the police against you?
I think that it's probably because they're scared that it represents change. Change scares anybody who's part of an existing structure. You know, like
The band would continue to have confrontations with police for years to come. The first quarter of 1981 would give way to the band's first cross-country tour. Black Flag did not have a booking agent or a manager. A network of people behind fanzines, record stores, record labels, other bands, and any other contacts would help them piece together just enough tour dates to get them to the East Coast and back. On March 17, 1981, Black Flag made their debut in Washington, D.C. at the 930 Club, playing for a packed crowd that included the singer of Minor Threat, Ian MacKaye, and the singer of SOA, Henry Garfield. The band slept that night at Ian's house before taking off the next day. While Black Flag made an impression on every crowd they played for, they had an especially big impact that day on Henry.
Because I remember when they left, and I will never forget, I left your place, they left and I left, Beecher Street. I had to walk to work, and I watched them leave in that van, and I said, damn, man, because Mugger's like the last guy in the van, like, come on, you knuckleheads, don't leave
That's
me.
right, yeah.
And he jumped in, I'm like, they're adventurers. They're going on the next adventure. I'm going to work. I'm putting on an apron and I'm scooping ice cream. I just distinctly remember the emptiness I felt as the van went up Beecher. I'm like, they're going into this world and I want to be in that van. I want that to be my life. And instead, I walked down Wisconsin Avenue to Haagen-Dazs.